On the 15th of February, Japanese investors teleported Bitcoin's yen trading pair to new all-time highs, weeks before BTC/USD had even made it out of bed. And Bitcoin is not the only thing ripping in Japan. Stock market indices have been breaking all-time highs too. But if that makes you think, wow, the economy must be booming, I'm afraid we've got bad news for you.
Bad news!
That's because Japan recently slipped into recession and lost its title as the world's third largest economy to Germany. So what in Satoshi's name is going on over there? And is it bullish or bearish for the rest of us? We went down a couple of rabbit holes to look for answers, and we came up with a lot more than we had bargained for. So stay tuned, this is a deep dive you don't want to miss. Now, before we get lost in Japan's crypto scene, let's look around and get our bearings. What kind of market are we looking at, and how did it get that way? To answer those questions, we'll need a quick history lesson. The left curve summary goes something like this. Japan had been trapped in the year 2000s since the 1980s. It's pretty silly, but as a shorthand for the recent history of Japan, it's not entirely useless. You see, in the late 1980s, Japan's economy was on a monster run. Japan was getting richer faster than any other advanced economy. Tokyo's stock exchange overtook New York's as the world's biggest, and by 1987, the 4 richest people in the world were all Japanese billionaires. You know the rest. Japanese cars, consumer electronics, and cartoons took the world by storm. Generation X was captivated by the image of Tokyo as the neon metropolis where it looked like the millennium had arrived early. But not everyone was such a big fan. In the 1980s, the spectra of the up-only Japanese economy had the United States sweating. President Reagan had to beg Japan to voluntarily limit its car exports after Japanese automakers broke 25% dominance in the US market. And after raking in massive dollar profits from selling stuff to Americans, Japanese corporations went on an insane shopping spree. They brought out major US companies and landmarks, culminating with the sale of the Rockefeller Building in downtown Manhattan to Mitsubishi in 1989. The American media lost it at that point and declared an economic Pearl Harbor was underway. Books started to appear with titles such as The Japanese Challenge and Japan as Number One, and The Coming War with Japan. Hollywood protagonists started getting fired at the hands of powerful Japanese bosses. Now, if the words top signal come to mind, then there is a gold star for you. Unfortunately for Japan, it was sitting on a massively overinflated asset bubble that exploded upon contact with the 1990s. And in hindsight, the top signals were deafening. There were many, but our favorite was the story of the so-called bubble Empress, One, who became a symbol of Japan's bull market mania. She was a grandmotherly restaurant owner from Osaka who allegedly received commandment from God to start investing. And invest she did. To build up her capital, Onuka set out forging collateral deposit receipts, which she used to obtain a total of 2.7 trillion yen in loans from 50 of Japan's prestigious financial institutions. That's more than $21 billion in today's money. She poured it into the stock market, and as a result became the largest shareholder of several of the world's largest companies, including the Industrial Bank of Japan. At a time where Tokyo had the largest stock exchange in the world, she was its biggest individual player, with a stock portfolio that allegedly peaked at $7 billion, or about $16.5 billion in today's money. As Japan's biggest individual day trader, her indicator of choice wasn't the RSI, nor was it the Bollinger Bands, but a ceramic toad in her restaurant that she used to divine market movements. You know what they say? Every toad's a genius in a bull market. Smash that like button to show some love for the fancy indicator, and double check if you're subscribed and have your bell notifications on so you don't miss another amphibian alpha, only on the Coin Bureau.
Get in here! Take a seat, sir.
Go on.
So tell me about these anxieties you've been experiencing. When did they first manifest themselves?
Well, I think they first started when I got into crypto. I started to worry about all kinds of stuff.
Such as?
Well, I became anxious that I was spending, way too much on exchange fees. Like every time I made a trade, boom, more precious crypto gone. And I felt like I was missing out in other ways too.
What other ways?
Well, for instance, why didn't I get a sign-up bonus when I registered on an exchange? I mean, come on, they should be welcoming me with open arms.
That's a common feeling for many people in crypto.
Yeah, go figure. And I kept getting told to buy a hardware wallet to keep my crypto safe, but some of those things ain't cheap, huh? I mean, what's a guy to do?
Well, there's a cure for those concerns.
You mean medication?
No, I mean like the Coin Bureau deals page. It is trading fee discounts on top crypto exchanges. It offers sign-up bonuses of up to $50,000, and it has discounts on the best hardware wallets too.
You mean I just go to the Coin Bureau deals page and I'm cured?
Yeah, absolutely. Just head down using the link down below.
Okay, I'm on my way.
Now, when Onu was arrested in 1991, her lawyers claimed she knew nothing about investing and was financially illiterate. The judge didn't buy it, and Onu was sentenced to 12 years in prison for fraud. It's hard to imagine a more perfect embodiment of the mania phase of the market cycle than the Onu affair. We may not see an equivalent to the bubble Empress in crypto this cycle, but there's still a lesson here. When the markets start getting silly, it's probably time to jump ship. Not financial advice. But unfortunately for Japan, it was too far gone. The ball looked like it was never going to stop running. And that can only mean trouble. When the bubble burst, it began a marathon bear market that lasted well into the 21st century. Japan is still one of the wealthiest, healthiest, and most culturally influential countries in the world, but it has never again seen the kind of growth, let alone the excess, that it became famous for in the 1980s. The era of stagnation that followed was legendary. At the turn of the 90s, Japan has some of the highest wages on the planet, but in the next 30 years, real wages rose by just 3% in Japan, compared to 50% in the United States and Britain. Japan's lost decades of the 90s melted into 2 and then 3 decades. The widely followed Nikkei stock index tanked in 1990 and spent the next 34 years trading sideways into oblivion, painting a nightmarish chart that had retail investors spooked for good. They took one look at that thing and said, Japanese stocks? Bro, I'm sorry, I don't hate money. Now, in the rest of the world, it's common for no-coiners to hedge against inflation by investing in equities. But in a post-bubble Japan, chronic deflation meant that your best RR was a piggy bank. We're not kidding. By 2022, Japanese households were sitting on a quadrillion yen, or $7.7 trillion in cash savings. Can you imagine the inflows if they had a spot Bitcoin ETF marketed at the old people of Japan? That is what dreams are made of. Anyway, 35 years later, the Nikkei index had finally made a new high. The words new all-time high are usually exhilarating, but in this case, it just means the people that bought at the top at 1989 aren't underwater anymore. So we expect there to be mixed feelings. Now, it remains to be seen how Japan's retail investors will behave throughout the rest of the decade. But with the economy falling into a technical recession after 2 quarters of negative growth, it might be too early to say that stagnation is over for good. And besides, stagnation isn't just about macroeconomics. Japan is notoriously old now, with a median age of 49, a number that's programmed to only go up as the population shrinks. Last year, the number of people who died in Japan was almost twice the number of babies born, causing the population to fall by more than 830,000. We haven't seen too many elderly people on chain lately, so if you ask us, these are some bearish demographics. And what about those mighty Japanese corporations? The ones who had the Americans so nervous? Well, they haven't gone anywhere, but perhaps that's also part of the problem. If we compare the top companies in the United States and Japan today, you'll see what I mean. Japan's top 5 companies by market cap are Toyota, Mitsubishi, UFJ, Tokyo Electron, Keyence, and Sony. The median age of these companies is 78, and that's discounting the 19th century roots of Mitsubishi. The top 5 in the US are Microsoft, Apple, Nvidia, Amazon, and Alphabet. Their median age is 31. And look, you don't need a calculator to spot the difference here. The Silicon Valley conveyor belt has been cranking out trillion-dollar tech giants for decades, and it looks like Japan has had no answer. It was the country that started the global revolution with money devices, with Sony Walkman and the Nintendo Game Boy. But in the smartphone era, Japanese companies can't even compete at home. Last year, Apple, Samsung, and Google cornered around 70% of the smartphone market in Japan, and Japan's second biggest smartphone manufacturer decided to throw in the towel. Of course, there is nothing wrong with different countries excelling in different industries. Toyota is still the world's biggest automaker, for example. But it's interesting that a country historically associated with high-tech innovation seems to have been asleep at the wheel for the duration of both Web 1 and Web 2 eras. But now Japan is hoping it will be third time lucky. After snoozing its way through Web 1 and Web 2, the government has decided to roll the dice on Web 3. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida made this clear in early 2023. He described Web 3 as the new capitalism, and name-dropped NFTs and DAOs as the next frontier for government's long-running Cool Japan PR campaign. The PM wants Japan to be a leader in Web3, and it seems he really means business. The ruling Liberal Democratic Party has a dedicated Web3 task force who have been dropping official white papers with bullish subtitles like "Towards an Era of Mass Adoption of Digital Assets." We love it. If you thought that was bullish, just listen to the tone of last year's Web3 white paper. Japan is positioned to advance towards a society where tokens and wallets are accepted by the public, perhaps first in the world. Japan is in a position to advocate with confidence the immeasurable future of Web3 to the world. The head of the Web3 task force is Liberal Democratic lawmaker Masaki Tiara, and he has been shilling this white paper like his career depends on it. If he's to be believed, it's not just the talk of the town in Tokyo, but in Silicon Valley too. He says that executives from Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta flew to Japan after reading the white paper and brought, and I quote, "a number of new proposals along with them." Well, we'll see if anything comes of that, but it is refreshing to see politicians trying to pump our bags for once. It's a jarring contrast with the United States, where the loudest voices on crypto talk like the whole thing is a scam and that the public needs to be bubble-wrapped away from. Think Gary Gensler, who had to be dragged kicking and screaming by Larry Fink into approving spot Bitcoin ETFs, years after Canada, Europe, and Brazil launched their own without making half of the fuss about it. And then there is Elizabeth Warren, Washington's very own crypto cop, who wants to KYC you every time you so much as think about checking your portfolio. Meanwhile, in Japan, the government is furiously drawing up plans to shill NFTs to the public. If you want to see what they're cooking, we suggest you read in the English translation of the Web3 white paper. You can check it out using the link in the description. But perhaps most encouraging in last year's white paper was the author's receptiveness to criticism of the government's own crypto regulations. And I quote, "Japan, which had once led the world's crypto industry up to the mid-2010s, has become a country that is avoided by entrepreneurs both domestically and internationally. Regulations were strengthened, and the crypto industry in the Japanese market lost its attraction. Many entrepreneurs and investors left Japan to seek better business environments." We think this is a good summary of the current environment for crypto in Japan. Back in 2017, the country was praised for its world-first attempt to regulate crypto without suffocating the industry. But that was 7 years ago, and the screws have been tightened considerably since then. Japan has since maintained its crypto-friendly image, But this is probably because the yardstick that is the decidedly unfriendly United States, and it's probably safe to replace friendly with coherent here. That's because while the US still has its knickers in a twist over which cryptos get to be commodities and which are to be damned to security dom, Japan has had a fairly straightforward regulations for the best part of a decade. But let's face it, that is a low bar. Clearly, a regulatory environment where the rules are public knowledge is better than one where they're treated like a state secret scribbled on the back of Gary's napkin. The problem is, clear as they may be, Japan's rules have become really tough. For example, much was made of Japan's first world stablecoin regulations passed last year. There's a lot to praise, but at the same time, the regulations pose real challenges for issuers. The collateral for yen-pegged stablecoins has to be held in Japanese financial institutions and can't be invested anywhere. This means they're subject to Japanese interest rates, which are generally below 0.1%, if not negative. Good luck trying to make a business out of that. Rates are better for US dollars, but non-yen stablecoin transactions on exchanges will be subject to a 1 million yen limit per transaction. That's about $6,700 at the moment. Well, we know Japan had a certain reputation when it came to the treatment of whales, but this might be a step too far. And that's to say nothing of exchange listings. A little over a year ago, Japan's Virtual and Crypto Assets Exchange Association announced they would cut the 6-month screening period for new coins to 30 days. This is encouraging, but we're in the thick of a bull market, and the total number of cryptos available on centralized exchanges in Japan is still in the double digits. For reference, let's compare major international exchanges. Binance has 373 cryptos listed, KuCoin has 770, and even the famously conservative Coinbase and Kraken have more than 230 each. But on Bitflyer, Japan's biggest exchange, we counted just 33 cryptos. Bitflyer's main competitors are Bitbank, which has a whopping 38 cryptos listed, and CoinCheck, where we were able to check only 27 coins. And to give you an idea of the rate at which coins are making it on to Japanese exchanges, check out Bitflyer's latest listing on February the 29th, 2024. Introducing, drumroll please, Doge. Shiny. We couldn't even find Sol listed anywhere. Maybe it's penciled in next cycle? Anyway, you get the picture. With asset support stuck in 2013, it's like Japan's crypto regulations have been shooting for a lost decade of their own. Let's do one more regulation. Leverage. You want to get rich quick trading crypto futures? Sure. Slide that leverage bar right up to the legal maximum and see what it says. 2x. Good luck getting wrecked in Japan. So whether you're a stablecoin issuer, futures trader, or shitcoin connoisseur in Japan, you've got an uphill battle against some of the toughest crypto regulations in the world. Now, you'll recall the Web3 white paper's claim that Japan led the world's crypto industry up to the mid-2010s. It's true, Japan once had the biggest Bitcoin industry in the world, and as we mentioned earlier, it was the first country in the world to take crypto seriously enough to try and regulate it, at a time where governments over the world were still bemused by Bitcoin. So how come Japan was so early to crypto regulation? And what happened to make everything so much stricter in recent years? Well, you see, in 2010s, Japan also led the world in getting wrecked on centralized exchanges. And we think that's got something to do with it. If you don't know what we're talking about, then get the popcorn out, because it's quite a story. The year is 2010. Bitcoin is so novel and obscure that Vitalik Buterin hasn't even heard of it yet. He's beaten to the chase by American entrepreneur and developer Jed McCaleb, who learns about Bitcoin on the tech news site Slashdot. McCaleb spots an opportunity and decides to build a website where people can buy and sell Bitcoin. He has an old domain lying around from an abandoned digital card trading site named Magic, the Gathering Online Exchange. Sure, that'll do. And so Mt. Gox Bitcoin Exchange is born. But barely a year later, McCaleb decides he has bigger fish to fry. The fish in question turn out to be Ripple and Stellar, which he goes on to co-found. Well played, Jed. So in 2011, he hands over the Mt. Gox website to this French guy, Marc Caplez, basically for free. Now, if you're thinking, okay, what's this got to do with Japan? Well, you see, Caplez moved to Tokyo in 2009, meaning that this Bitcoin exchange is now headquartered there too. And it's by this coincidence of fate that Mt. Gox would shape Japan's relationship with crypto for years to come. Under new management in Tokyo, Mt. Gox grows rapidly. It becomes the go-to website for nerds around the world to punt their savings on a couple of hundred Bitcoins. By 2013, it accounts for somewhere between 70 and 90% of the world's BTC traded volume, depending on who you ask. 2014 rolls around, and Mt. Gox is racing ahead at full speed, when suddenly the wheels fall off. In February, the exchange halts Bitcoin withdrawals, then suspends trading, and just goes offline entirely. At the end of the month, a bankruptcy filing in Tokyo reveals what's happened, and it's worse than anyone imagined. It wasn't even some sophisticated rug. Rather, shoddy code and paper-thin security meant that Mt. Gox had been leaking Bitcoin like a sieve. Hackers were able to take customers' BTC from hot wallets like candy from a baby. In total, Caplez claims to have lost 850,000 Bitcoin, worth around $56 billion today, and accounting for 7% of Bitcoin's circulating supply at the time. So while Mt. Gox was American-made, French-run, and used by an unlucky Bitcoin OGs over the world, it was the Japanese state that was left to clean up the mess. The regulators scrambled to write rules to make sure such a scandal could never happen again. But again, it did. In January 2018, just months after Japan's first regulations came into effect, Coincheck Exchange was wrecked by another blockbuster heist. Hackers made off with more than $530 million of meme coin, triggering a classic Burj Khalifa candlestick formation. Now, we have to give Coincheck credit for the way they handled it. Within 2 months of the hack, they made good on a promise to use up to 90% of the company's capital to reimburse customers, ultimately paying out $435 million in cash. It's not the full amount that was lost, but it's a darn sight better than Mt. Gox, whose creditors started getting repaid in, December 2023. Anyway, it was this series of misfortunes that led Japan to put crypto in the straitjacket that it's trying to wriggle out of today. And we're rooting for them to wriggle their way out. But it is a tough one, isn't it? When times are good, regulation can seem like crypto's kryptonite. But when the chips are down and the sexes are rugging, a lot of us will be quick to change our tune. Just ask Japan's FTX customers, who've been able to recoup their assets for more than a year now. At any rate, you already know what the moral of today's story is. Not your keys, or in plain English, get yourself a proper hardware wallet from the Coin Bureau Deals page. We've got the nicest prices in town. And while you're at it, you can find some cracking discounts on some of the top centralized exchanges out there too. And anyway, that's all for today, folks. We hoped you learned just as much as we did about Japan's colorful history with rugs, regulations, and amphibian indicators. If you did, smash the like button to give this video a boost. Don't forget the subscribe and bell buttons so you can be early to new uploads. And to everyone watching in Japan, we know there's a lot of you. Let us know what you think in the comments. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Mata kondo.